seminar. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. At RMIT, we would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which the university stands. We respectfully acknowledge elders past, present and future. Today, our speaker is Dr. Holly Kirk. Holly is a postdoctoral researcher in the ICON Science Group. I looked up ICON, Interdisciplinary Conservation, so the Interdisciplinary Conservation Science Group at RMIT. Holly specialises in understanding how animals move around their environments. Holly has been using ecology and spatial modelling methods to help plan cities that support urban biodiversity. She's currently investigating how to mainstream the biodiversity-sensitive urban design framework within urban centres. The title of Holly's talk today is Spatial Modelling and BSUD, Biodiversity-Sensitive Urban Design. Welcome, Holly.
Take myself off mute. Thanks very much. Thanks, that was a great intro. Shall I just go ahead and start sharing?
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
Awesome, all right. Hang on. This worked a second ago.
It's okay, take your time.
There we go. No, it's all right. There we go, classic.
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Nigel. Before I begin, I think the most important thing is to acknowledge, first of all, that I'm joining you today on Whadjuk Noongar country over in Perth, Western Australia. So I'm not actually in Melbourne. I'm sorry that you're all there and that you're having such a hard time at the moment. Hopefully I can entertain you for a few minutes. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this work has taken place. That's the people of the Wurrung and Bunwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This work was supported by various different people, including the Ian Potter Foundation, which is ongoing, GHD, the Nest Call Hub, and some of the work I'm talking about today was also developed in collaboration with the City of Melbourne. So just before I begin, a little bit of who am I? I have to apologise because I feel like I've been lurking around in the Centre for Urban Research for a while, and I have actually been working casually in icon science on and off for the last couple of years, but now I'm pretty excited that I'm a postdoc full-time in the Icon Science Research Group, and I'm working in the sort of interface between getting more ecological knowledge into urban planning. But my background is actually in animal movement ecology. So before I moved to Australia, I worked a lot on seabirds. But I've always been thinking about how we can better, well, just about conservation in general. And I'm a pretty keen ecologist. So enough about me. Why should we care about urban biodiversity? I mean, I don't really need to tell the people in this room that healthy cities are biodiversities. And not only that, but cities themselves can be hotspots for urban nature. We have, I think in Australia, 30% of Australia's threatened species occur in cities. And they're also just often built on places that have really high levels of natural biodiversity, places like wetlands or coastal areas. So cities are actually, they're important for urban nature. However, they're places where there's a lot of kind of tension between, well, space and money is at a premium. So actually doing urban biodiversity conservation can be quite depressing. But I have some good news. And the good news is that other urban professionals also find it really depressing to be working in urban development at the moment. So we asked, this is a group of developers, people in local government, urban planners, landscape architects. We asked them in one of our recent workshops how they would describe the sort of status quo greenfield urban development. And these are some of the words that they use. So depressing came up obviously quite regularly, boring, destructive. I'd like to draw your attention to Mordor, which I found particularly amusing. And I have to say that you must admire my restraint for not superimposing a image of the Eye of Sauron over this picture. This is an aerial image of the area of Armadale, which is to the east of Perth. And I think kind of exemplifies this pretty inhospitable habitat for both people and nature that is currently kind of the status quo for urban development in Australia. The really good news is, though, that actually lots of urban professionals do see that there is immense value in urban nature. And this has sort of become even more apparent as we've been going through the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, we asked the same sets of people, so urban planners, landscape architects, people in local government, developers, what nature meant to them during COVID lockdown. So this is a group of people who are in Victoria, and as you can see, there's a lot of positive language in there: connection, escape, hope, respite, peace, freedom. And I think we everyone in this room knows now that there's great value in to people in urban nature. So how can we achieve a kind of vision of everyday nature? We need people to be able to access nature. It's important for their mental well-being, their physical well-being. We also need to have nature integrated into our cities for a biodiversity conservation perspective. And how do we do this when there is so much kind of competing interests within the urban space and within our urban development process? So from my perspective, I think it's pretty clear that the way we do urban development needs to change, both for people and for nature. But how do we get there? This is a very complex problem. I don't think that we have all of the answers yet, but today I'm just going to briefly talk through some of the work that I've been doing in this space, particularly with the biodiversity sensitive urban design framework, but also some of my kind of thinking around how we might be able to use spatial modeling to aid in the decision-making process around including resources for urban nature. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of my sort of past projects that I've been working on with ICON and some current ones. So without further ado, just very briefly, some of you may already be familiar with the Biodiversity Sensitive Urban Design Framework, BSUD, but my colleagues Georgia Garrard and Sarah Beckersey created this framework with the idea that its main aim is to actually maximize best outcomes for biodiversity during the urban development process. So the framework follows 5 different steps. These are designed to map on to the actual kind of way that we do urban development at the moment, so within the development process. And that's designed to be applied at the very beginning of the development stage. There are some kind of key principles that are within the BSUD framework. We want people to maintain and introduce habitats, facilitate dispersal, minimize threats and disturbances to nature, facilitate natural ecological processes, so things like pollination, seed dispersal, and also create, this one's really key, create positive human-nature interaction. So perhaps one of the greatest potential goods that can come of having, a really healthy natural population on people's doorsteps is to facilitate their connection with the natural world. So that's one of the key things that runs throughout BSUD. And so as you can see, there are sort of 5 main steps there. The idea is that you work through those steps whilst you're going through the development process, identifying the values of a site, creating a set of really kind of overarching objectives that can be worked towards in the design process, identifying key actions that are used to achieve those steps, assessing those actions, so looking at different design scenarios, and then deciding which of those actions need to be applied within a development. And this provides some clarity as to how to include biodiversity in the development process. So we applied the BSUD in a real life scenario at Fishermans Bend in Melbourne. For those who don't know, Fishermans Bend is a huge urban renewal project. It's taking place now. You can see there are, I don't know if my mouse works, maybe it works, hopefully it does. So this area is on the kind of a sweeping bend in the Yarra River in Melbourne. And there are 5 different precincts within this development area, several residential precincts and the commercial precincts as well. So a huge undertaking, and actually probably, you know, work will be eventually completed in this site in 2050. So kind of quite a big, long, slow process. So how did we apply BSUD there? Well, first of all, we assessed some of the biodiversity values at the site. That helped us to understand a bit more about what potential there might be for the future of the sites. We then had a set of workshops, a workshop where we essentially got lots of stakeholders in the room, people from local government, people from local conservation organisations, and we workshopped together to create a set of 6 overarching kind of human-centric biodiversity objectives. So you can see those there: a place that honours Indigenous culture, a place known by its diverse ecosystems, a place with 7 seasons, a place for the senses, a place of shifting waters, and a place that's comfortable and beautiful in any weather. We also then talked and decided on 7 target or focal species for that site. And these species are important because they help us to, first of all, to kind of really use the ecological knowledge that we have about those species to create a set of quite detailed design solutions. But they also allow us, by choosing a really broad selection, as you can see in there, we've got things like fungi, we've got superb fairy wrens, a really common urban bird. We've also got kind of like quite amazing visionary species like brolgas and mangroves, which are both quite maybe unusual to see in urban spaces, but they're there because wouldn't it be great if we did eventually get brolgas back into Fisherman's Bend? And so you can see a little bit in that bottom right-hand corner how these focal species drive a design recommendation, and then how that maps onto meeting those initial kind of broader biodiversity objectives. It's kind of a way for us to translate this kind of ecological knowledge into key design outcomes for urban planning. We also then tested those different 3 different design scenarios using our kind of recommendations that were built, our design recommendations that were built off those target species. We used a connectivity analysis to do this. And that allowed us to come up with 4 key fundamental requirements for Fisherman's Bend and 21 really detailed design recommendations. And you can see a little bit there how those kind of mapped onto the site. So that work you can read a bit more about it. It was a very high level skim through, but you can read a bit more about it in our recent paper. So what are we doing now? At the moment, I'm working with Sarah and Georgia and also Casey Vicentin, who's a new colleague in Icon Science. We are working to mainstream BSUD. So this is work that has been funded by the Ian Potter Foundation. We're very lucky to have 2 three really key industry partners: Yarra Valley Water, who are some landowners of a greenfield site in Greater Melbourne; Lendlease, who are developing a different greenfield site in Greater Melbourne; and also GHD Consulting, who are urban planners involved with a different location over in Geelong. And we're really using these sites as case studies to try and understand how we can get BSUD into to be kind of business as usual in urban planning and development. And one of the key parts of the BSUD framework that I'm most interested in is this assessment. So how we kind of quantitatively compare different design scenarios for urban planning. And this links into some other work that I've been doing also in the Icon Science group. So I've been working a little bit now on using ecological connectivity to assess urban design solutions. And just really briefly, ecological connectivity is essentially a metric for quantifying how fragmented a landscape is, or the degree to which the landscape impedes movement for different species. Now, it's been used quite a lot in kind of sort of broader landscape scale conservation planning. Why is it useful in an urban context? There's a few reasons, really. One is that it seems to be relatively intuitive for people to understand. I think probably because people move around. People can understand that animals need to move around. It also operates at a range of different scales. So you can look at connectivity within quite a small area, and you can scale it up to the landscape scale as well. And actually lots of local councils and cities are already starting to use this in their planning. And there's a benchmark. So we have the Singapore Index, or the City Biodiversity Index, has ecological connectivity as one of its main measures. So I've been very lucky to work with the City of Melbourne on this for the last couple of years. And we worked with the City of Melbourne because they essentially came and said, well, we want a connectivity plan for the city, but we also want a method of doing this that will allow us to go back and do it ourselves again later, which is that's ideal, really. Like, we want to create, as scientists, we want to create tools that other people can use. So the great thing about this particular measure of connectivity that we've been using with the City of Melbourne is that it breaks down the landscape quite simply into areas, sort of resource areas for species, so habitat patches, and also barriers, so movement barriers for a species. So those might be things like roads, railways, buildings, or rivers. And it also works on, you can do it in your kind of usual GIS software, so things like ArcGIS and QGIS. And it also works on the kind of vector-based data that most local councils have available to them. So we use this measure of ecological connectivity called effective mesh size, which was been around for quite a while, but most recently Spanowitz and Jaeger have published a really nice summary on how to do this, on how to use this measure, and why it's a really great measure for connectivity. And essentially it's a measure of area. So you come out with the amount of connected habitat that you have at the end of the process, and a probability of connectedness. So as well as working this up in GIS software, I also created a reproducible workflow in R. And the really great thing about this was it allowed us to do some repeatable calculations, so we could test different urban planning scenarios. And so one of these scenarios was which roads in the City of Melbourne have the biggest impacts on connectivity. This might seem a little counterintuitive, because why would we want to do biodiversity conservation on roads? But as I said before, one of this particular measure of connectivity, roads are like a key barrier to movement for lots of species. And the City of Melbourne, a lot of their space that's available for doing capital works is actually alongside roads or or on roads and things like that. I've run out of words. Anyway, the City of Melbourne has this road layer which is split up into segments. And essentially what I measured was the contribution that each road segment has towards connectivity if we were to actually remove that road segment or create a park there, maybe slow down traffic, essentially reduce the barrier impact of that road segment. And what I was able to do is do this iteratively for 7 different animal groups and come up with these kind of top targets for biodiversity action. So places where potentially if we mitigated the barrier effect of that road, we'd actually have like potentially a really great impact for ecological connectivity in the city. Another example here, so one of my colleagues, Tani Cruiser, he's a mad keen urban planner, and he's really, really passionate about getting cars off the road and getting parking spaces converted back into usable space for people. And so he was running several different scenarios around what would happen if we converted different parking spaces in the City of Melbourne to parklets. And he said, oh, hey, could we have a look at ecological connectivity? And I was like, yes, definitely. And the cool thing is that, so again, ran the same kind of analysis. And what you see is that when in certain parking space scenarios, there were massive gains made in connectivity. And that was partly because we started to see the parklets behaving as little stepping stones between these larger parks in the City of Melbourne. So that was really great. So wrapping up now, what are we doing? As I spoke before, I'm currently working on this project, mainstreaming BSUD. So we're working on, at the moment, 3 different urban developments. 2 of them are greenfield, and one of them is actually a kind of commercial linear park that's in the city of Geelong. And a lot of the work we're doing right now is trying to identify some of the key challenges that we might face trying to mainstream BSUD, create some best practice guidelines, and obviously, really importantly, collect some evidence of impact. So, you know, what are the gains that we can make for biodiversity and people by using the BSUD framework in urban planning? And also testing the connectivity assumptions. So I'm very lucky to be working with BirdLife Australia, the City of Melbourne, and my wonderful colleague at the University of Melbourne, Kylie Soanes. And we started the Superb City Runs project a few weeks ago, which is kind of just blown up. We now have a Facebook group with over 700 members, everyone reporting on superb fairy wrens. And the basis of this work is that the City of Melbourne actually have gone in or in the processes of adding new garden beds to the landscape. And in some places, they are adding garden beds to essentially help improve connectivity based on our models that we created for them a couple of years ago. So this is going to be a really great opportunity for us to test the connectivity framework. And we are asking people to keep an eye out for fairy wrens, which will one day, hopefully later this year, be carrying small colorings. Anyway, I will wrap it up there. Thanks to all my amazing co-authors. And there's also a bunch of places where you can go to find out more.
Thanks so much, Holly. That was fascinating. Really appreciate you giving your talk today. Just going to stop the recording.